Monday, and that so happens to be the day that I like to talk about monsters. Hello, and welcome to Monster Mondays. I'm Geoff Arbuckle, co-host of the podcast Film Seizure, that you can catch each Wednesday at filmseizure.com or at a number of podcast providers online. In the June 1957 issue of Playboy magazine, a short story from the French-British writer Georges Langelan made its debut, The Fly. A year later, it became one of the most famous of all of the 1950 sci-fi horror films. The Fly was a fairly big box office hit. It was made for no more than, say, $500,000 and ultimately grossed somewhere between 6 and 8 times that amount in ticket sales. An executive at 20th Century Fox at the time was Robert L. Lippert. By the way, Lippert was heavily involved in a distribution deal with Hammer Films that helped get last week's movie, The Quatermass Experiment, into theaters. But Lippert was in charge of Regal Films, a B-movie subsidiary of 20th Century Fox. And it was Kurt Newman who showed Lippert the issue of Playboy, and while Lippert oversaw the production of the movie, it was ultimately identified as something a little bit more prestigious and was released by 20th Century Fox proper. James Clavell was tapped to write the script based on the strength of an unproduced project that he wrote for RKO that Lippert liked quite a bit. This would be Clavell's first produced work. He would later become a novelist while still working in film, and one of his main works was the 1975 novel Shogun, which later was adapted into a very popular 1980 miniseries. He served as an executive producer on that adaptation, and then later became a very highly regarded series that is currently running, that has won a ton of awards each year. His script for The Fly, it said, was one of the very, very best first drafts ever turned in. Most of what he had in his original first draft ended up in the final product, which is not very common. Sure, there's a lot of concepts or ideas or specific lines that may survive from a first draft, but it's very rare that a majority of what ends up on screen is directly from the first draft. Now, starring in this movie is David Hedison. He's billed in this as Al Hedison. Now, Hedison was mostly unknown at the time, but after the movie, he'd go on to have a pretty decent career, having starred on the television series Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea and guest starring in most of the most popular shows between the 60s and the 80s. Hedison appeared in 2 James Bond films. In fact, he's the only other person aside from Jeffrey Wright to appear as Felix Leiter in more than one Bond film. Now, I love why Hedison appeared twice as Leiter. The first was in 1973's Live and Let Die, and the second time was 1989's License to Kill. In the book for Live and Let Die, Leiter is mauled by a shark, which was adapted not in the 1973 film, but in the 1989 License to Kill. So it's kind of perfect that he came back to kind of close that loop from the Fleming continuity. Something else that was also in the novel for Live and Let Die, just to kind of flex my James Bond muscle here a moment, actually showed up in For Your Eyes Only later. It was the scene in which Bond is tied to the woman and they are dragged behind in a boat, and Bond uses the rough coral and rocks to basically free them. But that was also originally from Live and Let Die, but showed up in For Your Eyes Only. But anyway, this movie takes place in Montreal, and actually one of those movies that starts in the present, but is ultimately told in flashback. You see, scientist Andre Delambre is dead. His head and arm was crushed in a hydraulic press. On the scene when this discovery was made is Andre's wife, Aline. Now, she flees and calls Andre's brother, Francois, played by Vincent Price, to confess that she indeed was the one who killed Andre. Now, Francois calls a friend of his, Inspector Charis, who to basically assist. And while investigating, Francois tells Charis that the hydraulic press's settings are peculiar, as they've never really been set for the settings that they have, which basically would have brought the press all the way down flush with the base. they typically don't need for it to do that, particularly with the amount of pressure that was put into the press's mechanism. But Aline clearly did not know, at least to Francois's opinion, how to operate this press. So Francois brings Charis to Helene, and she is acting, well, bizarrely. She seems nearly euphoric. She calmly restates that she killed Andre with the hydraulic press. She will not say why she did that, but she also explains that she knew how to operate the press, and Andre put himself under the press for her to basically squish him. When a fly buzzes around the room, she becomes uniquely and intensely focused on it. But when it lands on a lampshade, her curiosity changes to disappointment when she swats it away. Charis wants to see Andre's lab, but when they go inside, all of Andre's extremely expensive and specialized equipment is completely smashed. The next morning, Helene is still acting strangely. She doesn't seem to remember, or she's playing off the fact that she doesn't have a son, which she does. I mean, it is kind of said later that she is pretending that it's Francois's son to maybe protect him a little bit. But she also has a very negative reaction that causes her to break down and cry when her nurse watching after her kills another fly in the house. Francois reveals to Charis that he was indeed in love with Helene, but did not marry her himself because she was in love with his brother. Now, Helene and Andre's son Felipe says that he saw a fly that his mother had been looking for, that she started looking for the same day that his father went away. Now, this fly in question is rather special. Its head is white and not black. In fact, it also has a kind of a curious white arm about it as well. Now, Francois tells Aline that the fly that she was looking for was in his study and that he captured it. But she doesn't entirely believe that he captured the fly because he's asking a lot of questions about what this is all about. She feels like if he's truly captured the fly, he would understand what's going on. But he plays hardball and says, after threatening to hand the fly over to Charis, Helene finally tells the story of what happened. She asks Francois to call Charis so that she doesn't have to tell the full story twice. And she makes Francois promise that after she tells this story that he will destroy the white-headed fly. Now, in flashback, she tells the story. A couple of months prior to Andre's death, Andre, and Philippe live a kind of fairy tale happy life. Andre shows Aline what he had been working on most recently in his lab, which is a matter transporter that he calls the disintegrator integrator. Basically, it disintegrates in one little cubicle and reintegrates in another one in the other room. He shows her that it is indeed successful, but only on small inanimate objects. The process, though, is still not perfect. He showed her by using an ashtray, and on the bottom it was written "Made in Japan." But when he demonstrated the process, she realizes that "Made in Japan" was written backwards when it reintegrated. So after checking the equipment, he tries again on a newspaper and it comes out perfectly. When the family cat comes into the lab, he decides to run another test on it. Now, it disintegrates as to be expected, but it never reintegrates. However, almost like a Poe story, the cat is nowhere to be found, but he can hear its disembodied meows in the lab. Now, a couple of weeks pass and Andre's experiments begin succeeding every time. Andre admits to essentially killing the cat, so Aline makes him promise to try no more experiments on living things. But later, Andre reveals that he did have a terrible accident that has left him without the ability to speak or respond. So he has to basically communicate with Aline through his typewriter and through knocks. 1 for yes, 2 for no, that sort of thing. But he gives Aline specific instructions and demands. And one of these demands is that she's to bring him a bowl of milk laced with rum, and she is to locate a specific fly, one that their son had captured but was told by Aline to release earlier in the day. the white-headed fly. He consumes the rum-laced milk as if he's sucking it up like a vacuum. When she explains that she cannot find the fly and that it was Philippe who captured the fly and she made him let it go, Andre's left arm, which he was tucking in his lab coat, comes out from hiding, and it looks like a fly's leg. Now, the next morning, he explains what happened. He disintegrated himself twice. The first time, it was perfect. The second time, that fly that he's looking for got into the chamber with him, and he needs to find the fly in the hopes that he can run the experiment once again and undo what happened. So it's up to Aline to find the white-headed fly. She attempts to catch the fly, but it gets away. When she tells Andre that she will try again in the morning, he gives her a note saying that it's hopeless, that he needs to destroy his equipment and himself. She tells her, and he tells her that his mental capacity is also diminishing, that he's getting strange thoughts, that he's not acting all the time on his free will. And she begs him to try one more time to go through the machine without the fly, and he agrees, but it doesn't change anything. She finally takes the black cloth off his head to see his fly face. The shock is so great, she passes out from it. And when she comes to, he tells her that she must destroy the fly when she finds it, and that he must destroy himself. And she finally agrees to help him by basically going into Francois's factory, where he plans to place himself under the hydraulic press. He shows Aline how to operate the press, and which she does to crush him. We return to the present. She finishes her story to Francois and Cheris. Now, Cheris tells her that she didn't do anything wrong killing the thing, but she also reveals that she was pretty glad that she killed it. But Cheris tells Francois that he does not believe her story, and that he must obtain a warrant for her arrest. Now, he does believe that she is fully insane, but that doesn't make Francois any less upset about this. And Cheris then says that if he can show him the fly, he will have to believe the story at that point. So now Francois goes on the hunt for the white-headed fly. And the next morning he sits on a bench, and beside it is a spider web with the white-headed fly trapped in it. Now the fly begins pleading for help as the spider closes in on it. And Cheris is arriving to arrest Aline. Now, Francois gets Cheris to, and shows him where the fly with a human face is, because Philippe said that he found the white-headed fly and it's about to be eaten by a spider. And sure enough, that fly has a human face and a human left arm, about to be eaten by the spider. Now, Cheris picks up a large stone, smashes both the spider and Andre, and Francois accuses him for murder, just as Aline was accused of murder. He killed a fly with a person's head, just as she killed a person with a fly's head. And the inspector finally agrees to say that maybe he can classify the death of Andre as really was being a suicide. And later, Francois tells Philippe that Andre nearly discovered a great truth, but for one instant he was careless, and that's what killed him. Now let's talk about three things I like about this classic sci-fi flick. First, I think it often gets lost about this movie that this is really very much led by Patricia Owens. This movie is mostly from her point of view. She's telling the story. She's the one who is on screen the most. And yeah, Vincent Price is in the movie. Yeah, it's her scientist hubby that creates the entire plot of this movie, but it's Owens who really has the lead role. She's the emotional center of the movie. She's supportive of Andre's experiments, but is horrified at the idea of him using live animals for the experiment. And it also should be stated that he's the one that ultimately disobeys his own wife's pleading, and he doesn't test on an animal, but he tests on himself, which leads to him being turned into a fly monster. But she's also the one tasked to help Andre solve the problem by catching the fly. And yes, she is ultimately asked to do the hardest thing she could possibly be asked to do, and smash him in the hydraulic press. I mean, the hydraulic press part is easy. I guess what I'm saying is killing her husband would be the hardest thing that he could ask her to do. But anyway, it's a good performance too. I mean, sadly, Owens never really had another major success after The Fly, though she did appear on some popular TV shows at the time. She ultimately retired from acting in 1968. Second, I think this movie has a really murky ending in terms of morality that makes this something a little bit different than your typical 50s movie. So one of the things about this movie is that in the short story, there is not a cheerful ending. Aline would ultimately poison herself after leaving a manuscript with her confession on it. Shiraz and Francois decide to destroy the confession so that she would be seen as mad and not a murderer acting with a somewhat clear head. Also, Francois killed the white-headed fly and buried it next to his brother. But in this, the studio needed some sort of a happier ending, despite mostly following the same plot and same details of the short story. Now, I will say some of Aline's near euphoric satisfaction in doing Andre's bidding and killing him is also kind of creepy, right? I mean, like, she's perfectly fine and ready to live the rest of her life after killing her husband instead of trying to wait one more day to find the fly. Anyway, ultimately, the murky morality comes from the idea that in order to have a happy ending in this movie, two wrongs had to make a right. Yes, Aline undoubtedly killed the body of Andre with a fly's head and arm, but it's being chalked up as she killed her husband. That's wrong, even if it would ultimately be the right thing if he is having a harder and harder time thinking and acting on his own free will. But then, to make sure she is not arrested and thrown in the loony bin, Shiraz ultimately smashes the hell out of both the spider and Andre's. And Francois is right. He committed murder in a way. So yeah, the savior of the happy ending is by having two quote unquote murders happen to commit a cover up. And it's totally played as if nothing was wrong with this concept. Everyone's happy at the end. Hell, even Philippe gets some solace over his father dying. Everyone's happy that Andre was killed twice. And that's kind of, it's played off as the right thing to do in a couple of different ways, but it is a really murky morality of the movie that really kind of separates the emotion of all of this that's going on in a very scientific way. You know, science often is emotionless, and you kind of had to be emotionless to have a happy ending here. But third, oh, holy flies, do I love the fly head costume for Andre. It is so freaking good. It's clear why 20th Century Fox wanted this to be more than just part of their B-movie arm. The story itself is better than your average monster movie, but that fly head created for this is fantastic. It's so good, it became a finalist to be nominated when she removed the towel covering his head to show his fly face and her screaming in his segmented vision. Also, it's very much calling back to something like Lon Chaney's reveal in Phantom of the Opera. So it's such a cool mask and really does look like a fly's head. Hell, if we only ever just saw his left hand, that too was very well designed. Now, head is instead of the 20-pound mask that acting in it was like trying to play piano with boxing gloves on. And I know that it was said that he was never really happy with that thing, but I do not care. It just looks so freaking cool. That wraps up this week's Monster Mondays. You can catch new episodes of Monster Mondays each Monday at filmseizure.com, but don't forget to follow Film Seizure at Facebook, Threads, Instagram, and Blue Sky. You can also subscribe to Film Seizure to get both the Film Seizure podcast every Wednesday morning and the Monday afternoon Monster Mondays show at your favorite podcast providers. We also upload the stuff to YouTube. You can also check out my website, bmovieenema.com, to read new reviews every Friday morning. Next time, Leslie Nielsen and Anne Francis must escape Dr. Morbius with the help of the benevolent Robbie the Robot in Fred M. Wilcox classic, Forbidden Planet. Until next week, stay spooky.